How many of you are familiar with fashion? Oh, perfect. Okay. We've got some people familiar. All right, let's dive in. I've spent over a decade teaching in university classrooms about the history, politics, and emotions behind getting dressed. When we build our wardrobes or find clothes to wear, we are making conscious decisions about how we want to convey ourselves to the world. Take me, for instance. This dress I'm wearing is communicating to you that I'm a fan of the 1960s and 1970s aesthetic. I'm also passionate about student work. This dress I'm wearing was made by a fashion design student. They also know that I am a fan of the 1960s and 70s aesthetic. This necklace I'm wearing keeps my late mother close to me. She wore this necklace in the 1970s and 80s. When I was a child, I didn't understand why my mother was so adamant about how my hair was styled, or why being presentable or well-dressed was more critical than our neighbors. In our everyday lives, we're actually navigating race, gender, and class hierarchies that are so deeply embedded, we hardly notice them. In fact, race itself is perhaps the most unwelcoming and uncomfortable topic. But I was deeply curious about how the construct of race has shaped beauty standards, the design of objects, and even industry practices. This hypothesis wasn't a reach. Centuries of ideologies and biological theories rely on physical appearance to supposedly prove racial hierarchies. I would go as far as to say the early architects of race probably knew that clothing can be a tool to signal knowledge and stature, or it can be used to oppress and intimidate others. This laid the groundwork for my academic pursuit of fashion and race. Why does race have to be brought into everything? That's a question that I read in a comment on a social media platform by a woman who was angry that her favorite fashion historian on social media announced her support for my work. I get it. Bringing up race is like a fly in the soup for people who wish for fashion to be a creative escape from the real world. Many look to fashion for aspiration, beauty, art, and fantasy. But unfortunately, there is very little in this world, including the fashion world, that has not been touched by the influence of race and racism. In fact, depending on where you live in the world, the texture of your hair, the color of your skin, the shape of your body, what you wear, all determine the number of doors that open for you. Some of us may even use clothing and hairstyling to thwart stereotypes that people may have about us. Or we may use clothing to show a sense of cultural or ethnic pride. But throughout history, when we have seen colonialism take place, or the supremacy of one group over another, clothing is used as a tool to mark that distinction. Clothing can divide us or bring us together. Take, for example, this example of enslaved people's dress between the 18th and 19th century. The material it is made from is called Negro cloth, a category of humble textiles that lacked comfort, vibrancy, obviously, or elaborate design. Designated for enslaved people, there was even a law in 18th century South Carolina that ensured that the Negro population did not get their hands on anything finer than Negro cloth. You see, the quality and design of materials mattered back then when it came to wearing your status in a social hierarchy. Throughout history in the United States, we actually have garments that have been used to terrorize or intimidate groups of people. Before there were men marching with torches in South Carolina wearing golf shirts and khaki pants, there were the red shirts in North Carolina. The red shirts was a paramilitary group of men in the 19th century who were seeking to protect white supremacy, their words, not mine, through violently achieving their political goals. Most famously, the men wore this red and white uniform to stage a coup as they ravaged the free and successful Black population in Wilmington, North Carolina. Sometimes we take for granted the fact that clothing can be used to define citizenship or make a bid for belonging. We may use clothing and hairstyling to assimilate or blend into another culture or another environment, which has the potential to improve our way of life. And though assimilation is usually voluntary, in the past, dressing to fit in has been achieved through brute force. This before and after set of photos shows how Sioux children were forced to shed their savage customary dress and adopt Western, more civilized style of dress. These traumatizing makeovers were used as an example to show what was possible when colonizing indigenous Americans as opposed to African enslaved people in America. So, when we ask, why does race need to be brought into the conversation about race? Because it's a way for us to heal and liberate ourselves through a knowledge of this history. Fashion education is flawed. I decided to create a course on fashion and race, which debuted in 2016. The result was a syllabus that historicized the construct of race and beauty standards, revealed the power of style, and examined the lack of diversity in fashion history. The classroom was like a microcosm of the most taboo aspect in fashion. Each year that I taught the course, students felt vindicated as I was able to academically identify what they already witnessed in the fashion world. The classroom was a space for vulnerability. It also facilitated conversations between students with varying lived experiences when it came to race, gender, religion, and ethnicity. In addition, I sought to introduce students to hidden figures who were lost in fashion history or left out of fashion history. For decades, fashion history has traditionally been taught through a homogeneous lens. This is a photo of Elizabeth Keckley, a formerly enslaved woman in the 19th century who used sewing techniques she learned to become what we call in European fashion history a couturier. Her meticulously crafted dresses were mostly worn by the former First Lady Abigail Lincoln. And while Elizabeth Keckley's story is a bit more well-known, there's many Black designers who were lost to history. So, I decided to create an assignment called Diversifying the Fashion Canon. For the students in the Fashion and Race course, they were invited to induct their own hidden figure into the canon of fashion history. In my fashion history classes, I created a voluntary activity called Our Fashion History, where students were invited to bring in family photos and share with the class based on the time period that I was covering that week. The goal was for students to feel like their own heritage was seen in fashion history. Something else that I noticed as a pervasive issue in fashion education is that we don't have enough faculty and academic leaders to affirm, nurture, and prepare the next generation of Black designers and designers of color. For some Black students and students of color, attending fashion school is a courageous and expensive choice, with parents often hoping that they would pursue something more stable and sure. There's a tightrope that these students walk when they're making it through fashion school. They could benefit from instructors who understand their point of view through design. Part of the labor, or invisible labor, that I experienced as a professor is listening to students who don't always feel seen, providing them with support. I recall a conversation with one former student in particular who was devastated that her instructor wouldn't accept fashion sketches of curvy African bodies, despite the fact that this would be her target customer upon graduation. For that instructor, it just wasn't fashion. The industry does not want to talk about race, but it should. Before the fashion industry became what it is today, the mass production of standardized clothing was made possible through slave labor. And although there's even modern slavery to this day, there are attempts to mitigate it. But we still have human beings making our clothes who are making low wages and working amidst inhumane conditions. We also have landfills that are crowded with clothes, and clothes that are shedding dyes and microplastics that are polluting the waterways. You see, resource extraction and labor exploitation is part of the legacy of racism and colonialism. The fashion industry needs a makeover. But what's at stake if we were to reckon with all that needs to be addressed in the fashion industry? One of the most glaring and unresolved issues in the fashion industry is the lack of diverse voices in positions of leadership. The industry's stubbornness to source diverse talent while wanting to enjoy global appeal has led to costly mistakes along the way. Dominant fashion brands, both in sportswear and luxury, come from Europe and North America, and they have their own attitudes and language when it comes to race. As a result, designers from some of these brands have made major design mistakes that have ended up offending entire cultures or groups of people. And it was simply due to a lack of cultural awareness and sensitivity. As I consulted and partnered with fashion brands, I wasn't prepared for the level of invisible labor that was involved, reminding me of the invisible labor that I was doing back in fashion schools. I would receive confessional phone calls or have these one-on-one intimate conversations that revealed unspeakable things happening inside of a company. Everything from blatant racial discrimination to Black employees being tasked with becoming the educator on race, even when it had nothing to do with their job. I did a focus group for a modeling agency where I listened to Black models recount stories about how the texture of their hair or their skin tone was a blessing or a curse when it came to companies marketing their features. The long-standing impact of racism and its associated beauty standards is still impacting models to this day, though there is some progress. These days, fashion executives learning about our differences just is not a priority. I recall a model agency CEO who felt that working with me would be useless, stating that the industry is what it is, and it will never change. I also had an industry veteran take me aside in hopes of saving my energy. They said, educating the fashion industry is futile. It's simply too far gone. It's simply too messed up. Here's just a few headlines that illustrate persistent issues in the fashion industry when it comes to race. Just taking this in. This is what we're avoiding right now. When we look at all of this, fashion leaders still feel like there is just too much to lose. The fear of shame, the loss of revenue, the tarnishing of a brand reputation. And, some feel that racism is just an excuse. Stop talking about it. Besides, hiring people who are racially and culturally similar helps to avoid experimentation or reflection. But I want us to build a more informed and compassionate fashion system and help us to destigmatize fashion and race. So, where do we go from here? I founded the Fashion and Race Database in 2017, and today it's a global education platform that welcomes students and subject matter experts to help me connect the dots between fashion and race. Image of our site there. When I think about what's possible with an education on fashion and race, I think back to a set of photos that a former student brought in for that activity, Our Fashion History, that I was telling you about earlier. It was the week that I was covering the 1950s, and the student wanted to show us how their grandparents met. So they brought in the photos, and I've got the images on the projection screen. We're taking in these beautiful black and white photos of this young couple. The clothes are indicative of the 1950s. They are stylishly dressed. I remember the grandmother had worn this crisp white button-down blouse, a knee-length skirt. Her hair was delicately curled. And the grandfather was wearing this button-down shirt, maybe some rolled-up sleeves and rolled-up jeans. Very cool looking. But then the photos began to reveal where the students' grandparents had met. It was a Japanese internment camp in the United States. Despite their confinement, it was the freedom through style, their self-styling, that helped give them a sense of dignity. This was also evidence that not everyone's fashion history is the same. So, I invite you to join me in removing the stigma of talking about fashion and race, considering the other side of fashion. It is only through learning about the relationship between fashion and race and reckoning with its long-standing impact on why we wear what we wear that we can achieve a more inclusive, compassionate, and honest fashion system. Thank you.